Here in example 6, we are asked to find the values of the 5 remaining trigonometric functions for each angle theta. So for part A, sine theta is equal to the square root of 2 divided by 6, and we are told that cosine theta is less than 0. Remember that cosine theta less than 0, meaning that cosine is negative, and that will help us to determine what quadrant that we are located in. We are told that sine is positive square root of 2 over 6, so sine is positive. We want to find which quadrant has sine positive and cosine negative. Well, sine is positive in quadrants 1 and in quadrants 2. Cosine is negative in quadrants 2 and in quadrants 3. So which quadrant has both sine positive and cosine negative at the same time? That is quadrant 2. That also tells us the signs of all of our trig function values. Cosine is negative. Tangent, because we're located in quadrant 2, tangent is also negative. Cotangent is negative. Secant is negative, and cosecant will be positive. Now that we know the signs of all of our trig function values, let's go ahead and find the actual numeric values. We know that sine is y over r. So our y value would be square root of 2 for the top of our fraction, that's our y. The bottom value would be 6, that's our r. What we are left to find so that we can form our trig function values would be what is x. Let's use our Pythagorean theorem. We know that it's x squared plus y squared is equal to r squared. And let's plug in our values that we don't know and that we know. X squared, we don't know that, so we'll leave it as x squared, plus y squared. Our y is the square root of 2. We will square that. And then 6 is our r value, and we will square that. So we have x squared plus the square root of 2 squared, that would be 2. 6 squared would be 36. If I subtract 2 from both sides, we find that x squared is equal to 34, and the square root of x, when we do that, we end up with plus or minus the square root of 34. Now, is it plus or is it minus? Well, we are living in quadrant 2, and in quadrant 2, x is negative. So we know that x is equal to negative square root of 34. Now that we know the x and the y and the r, let's go ahead and fill out the values of all of our trig function. Now that we know that x is equal to negative square root of 34, and we know the y value and we know the r value, now we can actually form the values of all of our trig functions. We already know the signs of each one of them, and now we're just looking for the number that goes behind the sign. So cosine is x divided by r. The x value is square root of 34, and the r is 6. So cosine theta is equal to negative square root of 34 divided by 6. Tangent theta, well, that is y divided by x. Our y value is the square root of 2, and our x value is the square root of 34. Now we need to simplify this and rationalize our answer as much as possible. When we go to simplify, square root of 2 on top, 34 can be written as the square root of 2 times the square root of 2 goes into 34. How many times? You have 17 times. On the top we have the square root of 2, and on the bottom we have the square root of 2, so we can cancel out those common factors of the square root of 2. and that leaves us with 1 divided by the square root of 17. So we have simplified, but we need to rationalize. So I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 17 to get that radical out of our denominator. So our final answer will be negative square root of 17 divided by 17. So we want to simplify, get rid of any common factors, and then we want to rationalize. We want to make sure that we don't have any square roots left in our denominator. Cotangent is the opposite, that is x divided by y. And x would be the square root of 34. And our y value is the square root of 2. We're going to do the same thing just in the opposite direction. We're going to simplify. That would be square root of 2 times the square root of 17. So we can rewrite square root of 34. And then on the bottom we have the square root of 2. And our square roots of 2 can cancel. Those are common factors. We end up with 1 as our denominator. So our final answer is really negative square root of 17. And we don't need the divided by 1 part. Secant is r divided by x. R divided by x, so r was 6, and x is the square root of 34. And once again, we need to simplify and rationalize. So we're going to multiply top and the bottom by the square root of 34. And that gives 6 times the square root of 34 all over 34. And now 6 and 34 have a common factor of 2. So we will cancel out a common factor of 2. That leaves us with 3 on the top and 17 on the bottom. And it was negative to begin with, so we end up with negative 3 square root of 34, all of that divided by 17. And the last value we're looking for is cosecant. Cosecant is r divided by y. Our r value is 6, and the y value is the square root of 2. So we need to rationalize and simplify as much as we can. Let's multiply top and the bottom by the square root of 2. We end up with 6 times the square root of 2 all over 2. And once again, 2 and 6 have a common factor. 2 goes into 2 once, 2 goes into 6 3 times, so we end up with a positive 3 times the square root of 2. So we have found our cosine value, our tangent value, cotangent value, secant value, and our cosecant value. You want to make sure that you're careful to simplify and rationalize your fractions. If cosine theta is equal to negative square root of 3 divided by 2, and theta is in quadrant 3, now we want to determine sine, tangent, cotangent, secant, and cosecant of the angle theta. So let's begin by knowing that theta is in quadrant 3. If theta is in quadrant 3, cosine is negative, and so is its reciprocal secant. What is positive? Tangent is positive in quadrant 3, and so is its reciprocal cotangent. Sine is negative, and cosecant is negative. So we know all of the signs of all of our trig functions because of the fact the angle is in quadrant 3. Now we want to know the numeric value of them. And to determine that, we need to know what x is, we need to know what y is, and what r is. X is, well, cosine is x over r, so x is negative square root of 3. R is always positive, so r is that positive 2. we need to determine the value of y. So we'll go back to our Pythagorean theorem. X squared plus y squared is equal to r squared. X squared, negative square root of 3 squared, plus y squared is equal to 2 squared. Square root of 3 squared would be 3. 2 squared is 4. We will subtract 3 from both sides. Y squared is a positive 1. And taking the square root of both sides, we get that y is equal to plus or minus 1. So is it plus or minus? Well, we are in quadrant 3, and y is negative in quadrant 3. So we get y is equal to negative 1. Now let's figure out the values of all of our trig functions. Sine is y over r. So the y value is minus 1, or just 1. We already have the sign there. 1 divided by, our r value is 2, so sine is equal to a negative 1/2. Tangent is y over x. Now notice that we said tangent was positive, and that's because y is negative and x is negative. A negative divided by negative gives us that positive. So we have y divided by x, and we get positive 1 divided by the square root of 3. We want to rationalize, multiply top and the bottom by the square root of 3, and we get positive square root of 3 divided by 3. Cotangent is x over y, and once again, cotangent is positive, and when we go back, we see that x and y are both negative, and when we form a fraction of them, we get a positive value. So our x was square root of 3, our y is 1, negative divided by negative gives us that positive cotangent value. So we get positive square root of 3. Secant is r divided by x. R is 2. X was negative square root of 3, but we already have the sign there, so we just need the number. And we need to rationalize. Multiply top and the bottom by the square root of 3. And we get negative 2 square root of 3 all over 3. And lastly, we have cosecant, which is r divided by y. Our r value is 2, and the y value is 1. And we already know that it was negative, so negative 2 is our cosecant value.